Welcome to this edition of our Public Affairs Forum. We've been hosting these for many years, and our partner in these events, PCN, is with us again today, and we'd like to thank them for their continued support of these efforts, and also to give a little shout out to them. This year is their 40th anniversary, so let's give a round of applause to PCN. I'm kind of excited about the program today. Our speaker needs no introduction to many of us. He is currently the face of Harrisburg. He has kind of an eclectic background. Doing research on him, he's done a variety of different things that I believe bring a fresh perspective to local government issues. He's an author. He wrote the book Evils of Necessity, Robert Goodloe Harper and the Moral Dilemma of Slavery, when he was at Yale. He's a teacher. He's a public school teacher. He taught Latin at CD East and Lingelstown Junior High. He's a business owner. He owns the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. It's an excellent location. It's given a lot of credit to revitalizing the Midtown section of Harrisburg. Has over 200,000 titles, sells books online. It's an excellent hidden jewel in the city of Harrisburg. He's also a media philanthropist. He and his wife established an endowment fund that they fund literary projects on the media. He's got a pretty interesting history. He was first elected mayor of Harrisburg in 2013, re-elected in 2017. So please give a warm round of applause and a welcome to the mayor of Harrisburg, Eric Pappenfuss.
Well, thanks so much. I'm proud of the fact that I think I'm the only mayor who grew from being a teacher and a bookseller to the office of mayor in the country, and I think it's prepared me incredibly well for all the tasks that I have to deal with on a daily basis. Raise your hand if you saw me 5 years ago at this forum. Yeah, a few, right? I think, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was one of the first things that I did right after being elected in 2014. I remember being very nervous and coming and speaking to all of you and being well received, and it was a wonderful event. But we talked about the future, and I'm going to have to dust off the tape from 5 years ago, but there were so many uncertainties. At that time, the city was still in receivership, which meant that I was basically working for the Commonwealth, and there was a state-appointed person who was calling the shots. That would happen very soon thereafter. Within just a couple months, the state would hand the reins back to the city. We had just emerged from bankruptcy. It was unclear where, or from the verge of bankruptcy, let's say. The city council had voted for bankruptcy. That's when the state intervened and appointed the receiver. We were still trying to negotiate a long-term deal that involved the incinerator and our parking assets. And things were very, very uncertain. But fast forward 5 years to where we are now, it's been an incredible run. The news for the city is very, very positive. And one of the things that I'm sort of most proud of, I'll give you a few statistics that sort of tell that story. Every quarter since that first quarter in 2014, the real estate market in Harrisburg has improved. There was a time, I think, when I gave that initial speech where you couldn't turn down a street in Harrisburg without seeing for sale signs everywhere. And to this day, the number of houses has increased every quarter. The selling prices has increased every quarter, and the value at which the houses are selling. So much so in the city of Harrisburg, and I know this because I've got a couple people in the administration that are new, and they've been looking for houses. Houses have started to sell in the city even before they hit the public market, which is great. And you're seeing a boom in real estate prices really throughout the whole region, but this is true in the city. That's one barometer. The other thing which is very exciting about the city is that for the first time in 70 years, because we're conducting the new census now, we're going to start to see population growth in the city. And over the past 5 years, we know this because we have seen a steady increase in tax revenue, both in terms of people that pay the sort of annual LST as well as earned income tax. So I can tell you that between this year and last year, we have at least 1,000 new workers in the city of Harrisburg, and people are generally earning more money, and that we've seen slow and steady growth for those 5 years. And that was a very different picture 5 years ago when when people were sort of leaving the city and very uncertain about wanting to invest in the city. So those two things are great. And that population decline started in 1950 with the process of suburbanization. We were just talking about the Agnes flood, which sort of solidified a lot of that. But it continued all the way up until about 2012, 2013, right in the heart of the city's financial crisis. And it's only been the last 5 years that have seen growth. We're also starting to see a lot of new businesses and exciting. I'll give you an example of one of my favorite stories. Webpage FX. If you look on Front Street, there's a beautiful renovated old historic mansion with a brand new modern addition next to it, right in the heart of Midtown. They moved in right in 2014, right after I was elected, and they have slowly grown to the point now where they have over 130 employees. They just bought a new building to add on to their campus and expand even further. They do tech-related web services for companies as large as Amazon and as small as mom and pop businesses throughout the country. They compete right here from Harrisburg. They compete with companies all over the globe, and they're booming and growing. And a lot of the people that work there actually have decided to move into Harrisburg because they like the idea of walking to work, taking the bike share to work, living in a city which is sort of pedestrian friendly, and where the cost of living is still quite reasonable and quite low. That's one of the great things about central Pennsylvania generally, but it's certainly true for the city of Harrisburg. So a lot of positive news. And I was very fortunate that I was just able to submit to, we've got a new oversight board called the ICA. It's a good acronym, stands for the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. And they asked for 5-year projections for the city, and we just put forth 5-year projections for the city that call for balanced budgets for each of the next 5 years, no tax increases of any kind, and a fair amount of investment and spending in much-needed, neglected infrastructure. We have roads galore that need developing. We have stormwater issues that need fixing. We've got a lot of investment coming into Harrisburg. And about 5 years ago, when the city had tried to go into bankruptcy and the state had stepped in, we lost our credit rating. And it basically meant that as a young mayor sort of stepping in, the city couldn't borrow. And so whatever we wanted to do, whatever project, whether it was buying a piece of equipment, a new trash truck, or paving a road, we had to do it in cash. And so I've been very careful over the last 5 years, and for each of those 5 years, we have underspent our budget, and we've saved up a couple $1 million a year to the point where we now have this nest egg of about $20 million of accrued savings in the city, which we are going to start over the next 5 years to pay down to spend on infrastructure. We're still not in a position to borrow, but we are in a position to spend our savings, so we've got some exciting plans, and I'll tell you about some of those as we move forward. Just in terms of context as well, if you look around the city, you see cranes, you see development, you see construction. None of this was happening 5 years ago when I last spoke to you. Let me give you 3 examples of projects that are happening in Harrisburg which are really transformative and amazing. I don't know, let's start in Allison Hill. Has anyone recently been up Derry Street, sort of in the Derry 13th, 17th Street corridor? If you go to the train station, you go over the Mulberry Street Bridge into Allison Hill. That's the area that we've been calling Mulder Square. Because it's Mulberry and Derry Street, they sort of converge. There's an old watering trough where the horses used to get a drink after they made that trek up the bridge and out of the downtown into the hill. 5 years ago, there were a slew of blighted properties. There were abandoned buildings. There were empty lots that were filled with trash. It had great potential because there are all these wonderful historic structures, but there was just filled with neglect. And we basically worked with all of our partners, from Habitat for Humanity to Brethren Housing to Tri-County Housing to the Harrisburg Housing Authority, you name it, and said, let's concentrate our efforts rather than just do projects all over the city. If we could all focus on just a couple block radius, what could we imagine? What could we do? And everybody worked together, each doing different projects, bringing in volunteers, and that area is amazingly transformed today, including 3 new affordable housing projects that are brand new construction that are just gorgeous and are currently leasing and bringing new people into the city, new energy. There's new commercial activity. We actually sold a home in that area fairly recently. It was a blighted project that was worth nothing. I mean, the building got renovated, and we were able to sell it for over $80,000, which is a very impressive thing, sort of setting a benchmark for the neighborhood for property values, trying to bring investment back, trying to get it to the point where the private sector could also come in and make an investment fixing up a home. So Mulder Square is looking amazing and is incredibly transformative. And that's just one area of the city. Now let's switch to Uptown Harrisburg. And I don't know how many of you have been down 6th Street lately, up near where they're building the new federal courthouse, but oh my. If you go there, you'll see a huge tower of earth and cranes and all sorts of excavation. They are taking the power lines and burying them underground. The city is in the process of redoing the streets there. I can talk a little bit more about that as we talk about Vision Zero for the city, but it's pretty amazing, and the federal government is well on its way to building a new $100 to $150 million plus courthouse, which is going to bring hundreds of people to that part of the city on a daily basis and have a real ripple effect for development. And then right next door, you have the Commonwealth building a brand new state archives that we're very proud about. I have to say, when I took office 5 years ago, they were planning to build that pretty much near you all, right out here in the suburbs. And we said, no, you can't take the Charter of Pennsylvania and all the founding documents out and put them, they need to stay accessible. They need to be in the city. It needs to be within walking distance of the Capitol. And they agreed. Governor Wolf agreed. They decided to look at sites in the city. They developed the archives. And so you've got this great energy between the two of these construction projects, not only creating a lot of jobs, but having a ripple effect. And I've already had 3 different developers just in the last month come to the city with ideas for new plans for market rate housing, plans for new affordable housing, plans for new commercial structures, new building. You're going to see that whole corridor in the next 5 years really begin to take off and develop, and it's exciting because it's one part of Harrisburg that really has an awful lot of developable land where we can see an increase in our tax base, but it's also out of the floodplain. It's on a ridge there, sort of overlooking, looking down on the train tracks on the one side and down on the river on the other. It's a great place to develop. So that's Uptown Harrisburg. And then, oh my, if you go to downtown Harrisburg, maybe you all have heard about what Harrisburg University has proposed, but they are proposing a massive expansion. And this is another good barometer for the city over the past 5 years. So 5 years ago, Harrisburg University had about 5 graduate students. And today they have almost 5,000 graduate students. And 5 years ago, they did not have a real financial plan for how this university was going to work and be successful. Today, it is incredibly successful. It was just profiled in the Chronicle of Higher Education for being one of the fastest growing universities anywhere in the country. And everybody wants to know how they're doing it. They've been able to bring graduate students from across the world to Harrisburg, thousands of students now flocking to the downtown, living in the downtown, working in Harrisburg. They've really sort of pioneered esports, which is an amazing thing that we could talk about for a long time. And they are looking to expand into the healthcare industry with more nursing, options as well as laboratories and other things in a new campus building, which they're also going to couple with a new hotel. Because another thing that you notice in Harrisburg is that on certain weekends and certain times when the Hilton is completely booked and the Crowne Plaza is completely booked, there isn't a single free hotel room in the city of Harrisburg. So there's going to be new conference space, new hotel rooms, a major new high-rise, which is going to be a real addition to the sort of skyline of Harrisburg for the first time in a long time. And that is also going to have a ripple effect, and there are others that are talking about additional plans. So originally they talked, for instance, about doing a housing component for that, and I think they're going to leave that to the private sector, and we'll see more development there. So 3 parts of the city, 3 areas where you've got exciting growth, and it's really tangible, and the spirit is very optimistic in the city. And although you may hear about the school district raising taxes or things like that, the city is financially strong and solid, and we are good for the next 5 years. Now we were granted basically a way out of Act 47 by the state. We were able to lobby many of the legislators that I think come before you here to this very forum, and we got them to do the almost impossible last year, which was a bipartisan bill signed by everyone, very few objectors, to give the city an opportunity to transition out of Act 47. So we'll be leaving Act 47 this year. They gave us sort of 5 years to continue to grow and solidify everything that's happening. That's the 5-year plan that I just submitted, and things are looking very good for Harrisburg. It is almost summer, and so I was trying to think about what might be interesting to tie things together with you, give you a little survey of what's happening in Harrisburg. And I thought to myself, the thing I like to do the most, and it also, I think, ties with a sort of healthy living, healthy lifestyle concept here, is I love the Harrisburg Greenbelt. And I don't know how many of you are fans of the Greenbelt, but one thing that happens in early June coming up here is that they do something called the Tour de Belt. And we basically, they bring police and others out, and we sort of shut down traffic. And the Greenbelt, which is basically a 20-mile biking, hiking, walking trail that goes all around the city, becomes an opportunity to sort of showcase and take a tour of Harrisburg. So I'm promoting this here today. And has anyone done the Tour de Belt before? Yes? And does Capital Blue Cross have a team that rides? If not, you should put one together, because it's great. I mean, people should sign up and do it. So it's coming up. It's the first Sunday in June, and it's a great way to see the city from a sort of new perspective. But I thought we could take a little virtual bike ride this morning, and I take you around Harrisburg as if we were riding the trail, and tell you about some of the other things that are going on that may be of interest, and then we'll get to some questions and we can have some back and forth. But if you were to go to HAC here and bring your bicycle and sign up for the Tour de Belt and get there on June 1st, the first thing you would probably notice is, and maybe you've already noticed this as well, that HAC, which is in the city, is a little bit disconnected and a little bit cut off from the rest of the city of Harrisburg. Actually, all of Wildwood Park is in the city of Harrisburg, but because the way the sort of train tracks run and Cameron Street runs, it's very disconnected from where people actually live. And perhaps Harrisburg's greatest attraction, the Farm Show, which generates the hundreds of thousands of people a year. A lot of people sort of come into the Farm Show, but never make it the rest of the way into Harrisburg. And so one of the great mysteries and hopes is how to connect that part of Harrisburg better, both the educational capacity that HAC has and the commercial enterprise of the Farm Show to Harrisburg, as well as to deal with some of the traffic issues that there's just too much congestion on Cameron Street, and we basically need a sort of a northern connection or a northern gateway for Harrisburg. And one of the things that you may have heard about that I've been pushing for a while, and that we've actually applied for federal funding for, it hasn't been granted yet, but we've gotten some preliminary funding to do studies and surveys, is a connector bridge that would go over the train tracks and would basically go from Division Street in Harrisburg near the old William Penn campus, near the Uptown Plaza, right where there's sort of a cul-de-sac, it sort of dead ends into the train tracks, right over the train tracks over to Hack and to the Staybridge Suites and the Farm Show entrance, which is an incredible thing. Now, that would also alleviate a lot of the congestion on Cameron Street, because we give people an opportunity to leave the city through other means rather than always going across, going up Her Street or Maclay Street and sort of going to those very congested intersections and then trying to leave. It would be a real game changer in terms of a connector for the city. It would also help with the development of some of the prize real estate projects that we have in Harrisburg, William Penn being probably the #1 largest area of potentially developable land. So that you would notice. You'd also probably notice this creek called the Paxton Creek, which runs into Wildwood Lake and sort of runs back behind Hack. And if you didn't know, it then runs all the way sort of paralleling Cameron Street through the city and eventually empties out into the Susquehanna River. We talked a little bit about the '71 flood, and it is very rare for the Susquehanna River to overflow its banks and cause massive flooding. What usually happens is it's the creek which backs up, and the flooding actually comes from Cameron Street, from that whole corridor, sort of pushing back towards the city, doing a lot more damage than if the water were to sort of pour over the banks onto Front Street, which does happen, but doesn't happen as often. We did a survey which was actually it was sponsored by PennDOT, which basically did a survey of the Paxton Creek, and it estimates that if we were to de-channelize it and create some spaces for a sort of natural floodway in parts for the creek, we could reclaim literally hundreds of prime acres in the center of Harrisburg for potential development, another greenway, another potential trail as well. The Paxton Creek used to be the way the city handled all of its sewer and wastewater issues, and everything would just get dumped in the creek, and the creek would wash into the Susquehanna, and then Susquehanna would wash it down eventually into Chesapeake Bay. All that is very much frowned upon today, and there needs to be a lot of investment in our infrastructure. Even we have what's called this is a little technical, but we have a combined water stormwater system, which means that when it rains really, really heavily, all that water, it goes into the sewer system, and it can mix, and it can spread undesirable elements into our natural environment. And Capital Region Water is hard at work in doing that. So we already have to invest in cleaning up the creek. But back during the days of the City Beautiful improvements about 100 years ago, the idea was concrete, modern. Let's create these concrete channels, and we'll just whisk the water away rather than having it standing still in the middle of Harrisburg. Well, all that infrastructure needs to be upgraded, and there are whole areas where if you allowed a more natural spillway and you got rid of those concrete impediments, water could naturally find a home in a way that would alleviate flooding. Would alleviate flooding on Cameron Street, would make other opportunities developable. One of the real reasons that you can't develop in the floodplain is because it's incredibly costly to do the necessary type of flood remediation in those areas. Well, all this could change, and this is called the Paxton Creek Dechannelization Project. It would also allow for a biking and walking trail that would basically bisect the Greenbelt. If you think about the Greenbelt as a circle, and we were starting at Hack, you could go through the center of the circle all the way from one end of the Greenbelt to the other by developing a biking walking trail. That would be a natural component of this. You create the extra spillway, you put in a biking walking trail, which you can use almost all the time except when it's actually flooding. And you have a wonderful thing. This is to come for Harrisburg. We're actively pursuing funding options for this. And it may sound, the whole project is like a $100 million project, but you can do it in bits and pieces, and we're working with partners, everybody from Pensy Supply to the Scrapyard to the Farm Show, to do bits and pieces of this over time, and eventually you can connect the whole walkway. But that's Paxton Creek. That's a big transformative project for the city. So you're on your bike, you see Paxton Creek, you wonder why there isn't a bridge across the train tracks, and you start pedaling along Hack, and you go up to Linglestown Road. This is how the Tour de Belt works, and right there you're going to start to see this construction, and you're going to perhaps wonder what that is. And what that is a brand new bike trail connector to Fort Hunter. And this is phenomenal, because Fort Hunter is one of the great resources that also it's in Susquehanna Township, but prior to this connector, which they're building, it was a little dangerous, a little harder to get across on a bike or to walk there, and so basically people would drive to Fort Hunter. So we're encouraging people now to be able to bike and go there. You go through that construction, you go down a little ways, and you go through Harrisburg, and then you're into Riverfront Park. And the first thing you see when you get into Riverfront Park is, well, there's this nice bike lane that's going down Front Street. And 5 years ago, when I came here and spoke to you at that time, we had just decided to put in the bike lane. And to this day, the bike lane remains the most controversial decision which I have ever made. The new composting facility is challenging that now, and we can talk about that one. But the bike lane, it was changed for people. We took 3 lanes, we went down to 2, we put in a bike lane. Everyone was worried about what it would do for traffic. It's actually worked out perfectly well. Moved the cars off the curbs a little bit, made it a little safer for people, took the congestion out of the park. And it's true that it's used mostly for professional bikers, and kids and families still mostly stay in the park, and that's fine. But it was meant as the start, not the end, of what would eventually become a sort of interconnected grid of bike lanes. And as you are, biking down Front Street in the bike lane and trying it out as part of the Tour de Belt, you'll think to yourself, well, where could the next bike lane be? And we've got hopes and thoughts and concepts. The next bike lane will be 1 street up on 2nd Street, and that will be going back in a northerly direction. And this is what we're calling 2nd Street Two-Way, which is a very important part of the city's future plans for the next several years, as transformative in many ways as the Paxton Creek project, but one that we actually have funded. And if you look in the 5-year plan that I submitted, you'll see that 2nd Street Two-Way is one of the funded things that we're using our $20 million of sort of accrued savings to fund. And it basically says, and you all know 2nd Street, but 2nd Street is a sort of 3-way super highway, and people zoom out of the city as fast as they can, and it's usually much above the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. And it basically cuts through a residential neighborhood, and it disconnects families from the river, and it's not particularly safe. And so one of the sort of foundational aspects of what we're calling Vision Zero, which is a vision to eliminate pedestrian-related fatalities on our streets in Harrisburg, is to look at what we're calling the sort of high injury network, and look at places where there are a lot of accidents, and do what we can to engineer solutions, that some of which are pretty easy, some of which are more expensive, to try and make things safer for everyone. And we've done traffic studies, and we actually believe that if you take that and you make it a 2-way street, you will actually relieve congestion, because you'll make it easier for people to get around in other directions and off-side streets. But you will also make it much safer. You'll slow people down. You won't have as far to cross. Let me give you another example of what it would look like. Right now on 3rd Street in Harrisburg, if you've tried to get down 3rd Street, you'll see that there's an awful lot of construction. And one of the things that they're doing is that at each of the major intersections, so if you were to go to the Broad Street Market tomorrow, you'd see that they've shut down the whole intersection, and they are creating what they call bulb outs, or are sort of pedestrian refuge areas on either side of the major intersections, which sort of cut into the travel lanes a little bit. So it reduces the width of the road, but when you reduce the width of the road, you end up having a shorter distance for pedestrians to have to cross. You couple that with better lighting, new signals, new crosswalks, and suddenly it becomes much easier to get across, and actually traffic can flow even faster, because signals don't have to wait as long for people to cross, and so so the whole thing moves much better. And then within those pedestrian cutouts, you can do green infrastructure and stormwater management. So instead of having all this asphalt, which just whisks the water into the storm drains and then can end up polluting the Susquehanna River or the Chesapeake Bay, you can do plantings and you can have water naturally filter through the ground into underground sort of basins and containers, which is a wonderful way to manage your stormwater, and it reduces the overflows and the discharges, and it's good for the environment. So all of this sort of is working together. You don't notice all of this when you're in the bike lane, but maybe you're thinking about it. Maybe you're building up an appetite as well, and you're thinking, I wish I could get some lunch, and I'm going to go, after this bike ride, I'm going to go to the Broad Street Market. And if you haven't been to the Broad Street Market, talk about another success story over the past 5 years. It is amazing. When I took office, I was literally, it was sort of the day before, it was December, before I took office. The whole board submitted their resignations. The market had been shut down due to a series of rodent infestations. It was not good. They had, the buildings were empty. Nobody wanted to go there. Today, long waiting list. It is flourishing. It is packed on the weekends. The Millworks has really done a nice job and is growing as well. Greater opportunities than ever before. And you have happening what the market's always supposed to have been for Harrisburg. You're having this wonderful business incubator feel to it, and you have all these businesses such as Urban Churn, which used to sell ice cream. They're all moving out of the market now and moving into their own storefronts. They've sort of grown to the point where they're investing in Harrisburg. So Urban Churn is one. Radish and Rye, which is an organic grocery, is another. They're moving into a storefront across the way. Need, the pizza place, is renovating an old pizza place. So you've got at least 3 businesses that are starting to expand out of the market, and all that is really exciting. So continuing down Front Street, you then make it to the area where you have the lower Riverwalk, and you're going to notice that is under construction, because for the first time in 100 years, we are concreting the entire lower Riverwalk, and it will be done by the end of the summer. It's going to be, if you go to Arts Fest this weekend, it may inconvenience you a little bit. You won't be able to get quite down there in every place, but it'll be done. And what it will do is it will now provide a flat surface for bicyclists, strollers, anybody who wants to sort of go down safely along the river. It was a 100-year-old infrastructure, so it was filled with potholes, filled with things growing out of the concrete. But that is all being done now. That's a $1 million project the city is investing in. By the way, you've just passed the lovely Capital Blue Cross exercise area. I don't want to forget that. Maybe you've gotten off the bike and you've stopped and you've decided to do some push-ups or some leg jumps. But now you're down on the lower, and you're basically you take that all the way. I'm taking you on the whole Greenbelt. You go all the way to about to PennDOT, where you have a rest stop, and you are basically underneath 83. And I wanted to mention that a little bit to you this morning as well, because this is a real issue for the city. I don't know. I guess you're used to the construction that's been going on this leg of, but it's nothing compared to what they have planned for the rest of 83. We're talking about 12 lanes from what's currently now, a widening of everything, new interchange, and the main thing is there's a lot of eminent domaining of land all up and along Harrisburg. And I took you underneath only by bicycle do you really get a sense of this, but when you go underneath the overpass, you really begin to see the degree to which 83 sort of splits through and separates South Harrisburg from the rest of Harrisburg. And if you imagine that overpass being extended by another 50%, and then and beyond that, other types of stormwater and further development for 83, you begin to see the impact that this is going to have. It's also a $1 billion project. Talk about our state tax dollars at work. It's $1 billion to do this for 83. So we really have to have a conversation. The city's trying to have a conversation. It's not that we don't want people to get from point A to point B, in a reasonable amount of time, but we really should be talking about mass transit, and less of a reliance on automobile travel, especially if we're looking out 20, 30 years. We should be talking about how we can get people to use transit as a means of getting into the city. We should be thinking. This is my opinion, but I think it is the opinion of a lot of people in the city that we already have. One of the things that is true about Harrisburg, is just a fact, is that our population doubles during the day. It actually more than doubles during the day. And we already have massive numbers of people coming in, and our infrastructure is full. So if you make it even easier to bring thousands of more cars into the city, there is a point to which there's a ripple effect to this pressure, and it puts a lot of pressure on the city. And our streets aren't wide enough; they're not designed for it. It's something that needs to be thought through. Whereas if you had, and I told somebody as we were having breakfast, if you redid the Cat Bridge, which is the bridge that goes across the Susquehanna, touches City Island. I know somebody had asked, can we rebuild Old Shaky and reconnect the East and the West Shore? And I'm like, sure, but actually what we should probably do, because there's already some money for it, is to turn that bridge into both a pedestrian and a potential mass transit option for connecting the East and West Shore. I'd love to see part of that $1 billion go to that project. But maybe you're thinking this, maybe not. Maybe it's just a lovely day, and you're continuing on your bike ride. You then go up to Cameron Street. You'll cross Cameron Street, and you'll find that we've got these wonderful new push-button signals. You see another one of these at Vaughan in front, and there's another one near Reservoir Drive in the Civil War Museum. These were put in to make it easier for bicyclists and pedestrians to cross at the Greenbelt crossings. And otherwise Cameron's a very difficult street to cross. So you cross at that, and you get on one of our lovely parkways. Did you know that there are parkways that were developed 100 years ago as part of the City Beautiful movement that are paved, wonderful areas that go that basically connect Harrisburg to Swedera, and then also another parkway which sort of runs between Swedera and Susquehanna Township. These are wonderful places to take a walk. There's gardens. There is nature. It is a lovely place. You will notice at that point that there's an area where they have demolished about 40 or 50 homes off to your left. And that is the Harrisburg Sinkhole Project. And wanted to mention this as well because it was also 5 years ago when I got a call. It was early one morning, and it came from Public Works, and it basically said, well, Mayor, street has opened up in Harrisburg and swallowed a car, and we don't know what to do. And the first impulse of the Public Works Department at that time was, let's just fill it in with dirt and pretend that it didn't happen, which I think they'd done before, which didn't work very well. But the water main had broken, and it was in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and we had to do something. So we got the geophysicists out and the scientists out, and Gannett Fleming and all these folks. They all came out, and we did a sort of underground mapping of the area and determined that there were these. It's a limestone geology, and there were these areas of fissure where sinkholes had developed, and they were literally going right through the center of the street. And it was going to cost millions of dollars. Another project that was going to cost millions of dollars. And how are we ever going to do anything about it? And these poor folks, they didn't have water, and it was a permanent problem. So we were successful. Harrisburg was successful in being the first city in the nation to be able to convince FEMA and the federal government to cover sinkhole disasters as part of disaster mitigation relief. FEMA was used to dealing with hurricanes and floods and forest fires. They'd never done a sinkhole before because sinkholes tend to be sort of slow moving, and they happen after the fact, and they can't be tied to a specific triggering event. But we got it done. Those buildings have been demolished now. It's turning into a nice green space in a park. It's sad in that sense, but it's very positive in the sense that every family was relocated, including the renters. There was assistance for that. We worked with them to close on the homes. Everybody was paid a fair price for them, and they understood. I mean, it was an act of nature. It was nothing that could really be done. But you'll notice this construction as you're going through, and you'll wonder what it is, and you'll then move up, and you'll end up in Reservoir Park, and that's the second rest stop on the Tour de Belt. And when you get there, you will sort of look down on State Street from the top of the hill. I could talk a lot about plans that we have for Reservoir Park. One thing that we're trying to do is upgrade. We have a lot of parks and playgrounds in the city. We've been trying to upgrade each of them. We've been working with the water company and with the Commonwealth, DCNR, DEP to as we upgrade them, put in things like pervious pavement for the basketball courts and other types of stormwater management but new equipment as well, and it's going very well. And we have the latest park plan that we have is for a new, what they're calling a chutes and ladders playground in Reservoir Park. It's very hilly, so you can imagine using some of those hills for slides and having a natural environment. This is all very exciting, but I wanted to mention State Street because this is another thing that's about to happen, which is going to be a big change for people, and you need to understand why. If you look at State Street, unfortunately, that has been called by many the most dangerous street anywhere in Pennsylvania. We've gotten a lot of publicity from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They've been supportive. We want to again reduce the number of travel lanes on State Street. There's currently a total of 7 lanes on State Street. You've got 4 lanes of traffic, 2 in each. You've got a turning lane. You've got 2 lanes of parking. It's this hugely long street where people, in order to get from one end to the other, often unfortunately have been hit by cars. And we had a span of about a year where we had 5 pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities on that same strip of street. So we're developing what's called a rapid response, and we want to put in first in Pennsylvania to have a parking protected bike lanes on either side of the street, which basically means what you do is you take your parking cars and you move them in, taking over one of the travel lanes in each direction, and then in that empty space you put in a little quick curb, and you have a potential it's both a pedestrian refuge and a place for bicyclists to be able to bike safely. This is not currently allowed in Pennsylvania, and there is a legislature, bipartisan law attempt in the legislature right now to change the law and to get parking protected bike lanes. The city supports that. Pittsburgh does, Philadelphia does. But Harrisburg's would be a pilot. We're pitching it as a pilot, sort of first in the Commonwealth, and we hope to do that really before the end of the summer. It's just paint and a little bit of quick curb, but it's going to make a big difference, and that's called the State Street Rapid Response. At any rate, you cross over State Street, you continue down, you're into Susquehanna Township now, and then the Greenbelt goes through the state hospital grounds. And you're almost back to Hack, but you're going through the hospital grounds, and you may know that the state, of course, has now gone through the process and transferred ownership of those to the Dauphin County Authority, and they are very much marketing the hospital grounds. And there's about 900 employees that are still there at the state hospital grounds, which are all of which are being relocated. And the Commonwealth issued an RFP saying, "Hey, we've got 900 employees. You know, who wants to find us a new home?" And they sent out this RFP for Dauphin County, Cumberland County, the whole region. And I'm really excited. Another sign of the city's strength and growth is that people from throughout the city, developers throughout the city, submitted applications. And we don't know who the finalists are, and we don't know who they're going to award these 800 jobs to. But I can tell you, there was I don't think this is top secret, but there were areas near the train station that where the old Patriot News used to be, which was recently torn down, that could be developed with an influx of 900 new sort of guaranteed workers and tenants. You can build quite an interesting mixed-use building there. 6th Street Corridor had applications. There were others in more neighborhood and in the downtown. A whole lot of interest and action. So we'll see what happens there. We'll also see what happens to the old hospital grounds. And you will notice as you go down Stanley Drive on your bicycle that you'll be passing by an empty field on your right, and on your left you will be passing by the State Composting Center, which is a paved area filled with leaves that DGS deposits all the leaves from the State Capitol Complex on. You will also notice that there are no homes anywhere near this area, and you could be screaming as loud as you wanted on that bicycle and nobody would be able to hear you. Well, this is the proposed site of the city's composting facility, and we are very interested in doing the right things for the environment, and currently, I know this is shocking, but much like sometimes our wastewater goes into the Susquehanna River, well, we just used to burn things in the city of Harrisburg. So we just burn, you burn leaves, you burn yard waste, you burn, it's not best practices. So the way to do it is to establish a composting facility and to have windrows and use the compost then in urban gardens and in our parks and our playgrounds and all these wonderful things that we are, all the new plantings that we're doing and the green infrastructure, you can use the compost for all of that. So, but you need a flat, relatively sort of sheltered area outside of the floodplain. And that's why we sort of chose this site. It's a site that used to be, long ago, used to be an old middle school for the city. So it was owned by the school district. It was originally part of the state hospital grounds, but they deeded it to the school district, and we're trying to get that done. I only mention it because it's turned into a sort of focal point of some of the divisions between the surrounding townships and the city. There's I think a fear that that somehow we're not just going to do composting. We're going to get in there and turn it into a used car lot or I don't know, a toxic waste facility or something like that. And we're working our way through that. But then you come back down to Cameron Street and you are back sliding into Hack. And the whole tour for this bike loop is about 20 miles, and it sounds a lot, but it's actually almost all downhill except for a little section when you have to go up to Reservoir Park. And I am not ashamed to admit that I walked my bike on that last little bit. But then once you get up in Reservoir Park, you can basically glide all the way back down to the farm show. So it's a lot of fun. And okay, so with that, that's just a tour of the city and some of the things that are happening. It is about 9:15, and I think we've got like 10 minutes or so for questions. Does that sound good? Okay, great.
Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask?
Any topic, nothing is off limits.
Thank you for being with us this morning.
Sure.
The housing sales in Harrisburg,
Yeah.
you mentioned at the top of the hour. I hope this is a fair question for you, but are you aware if those home sales are to residents who are going to live in the city rather than to absentee owners? Which
Yes.
is probably
Yeah.
all of its own.
Yeah, I was doing residential home sales, and these would not be apartment units, or there is certainly that occurring, but I was looking purely on the residential numbers, and that's very positive. And you can couple that, you can measure that, and couple that with the tax revenue. So we know more people are moving in and living in the city. We do have a lot of rental units in Harrisburg, and that's a continuing challenge. And one of the issues that you're going to hear talked about as we move forward is I think there's a lot of concern. I don't think it's happened yet, but there's a lot of concern about the potential for gentrification, which would include the increasing of rents and the displacement of communities. And this is always a tension when you have such good development news as I'm describing, right? So there are people that currently live in the 6th Street corridor who think to themselves, well, I hope I'll be able to be a part of this. And that's where a concept called inclusionary zoning comes in, which is basically a requirement, but it's done at the early stages of development to make sure that you have some affordable units in every type of market rate development that you have. The city does not have a requirement for that. A lot of major cities do, and we're sort of working on those issues. I will say the development that we did which was, so you have private development, such as Harrisburg University. You've got pure public development like the courthouse, but then you also have public-private partnerships like the city's engaged in Allison Hill. And we've done a very good job there of making sure that we have apartments at various price points. So those new buildings that I described in Mulder Square, the amount you pay in rent is based entirely on your income. So, and it's not based on the quality of the unit. So somebody may pay $300 a month, and another person may pay $900 a month for the same space. It's just based on what you can afford, and that tends to be a pretty good way. Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on that question. One of the challenges facing any real estate market is the quality of the school system involved. Harrisburg school districts have been in the news quite a bit lately, and you have been quite outspoken about it. I'm curious if you'd like to share your thoughts about the Harrisburg school system.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question and a good one. I can be as bullish as I want about the future 5 years for development. I can continue to tell you about all these wonderful people that are moving into the city. I think I used webpage FX as an example. Well, they employ, for the most part, they employ people in their 20s and early 30s. It's a tech company. That's a lot of what we see. Well, these folks don't have children yet. So they're moving into the city. Maybe they're starting families. They're beginning to think about those options. And all of that is happening now. But how are we going to retain those folks? How are we going to keep building on that population growth if we have a school system which is underperforming to the extent that Harrisburg is, which means it's one of the worst performing school districts in the nation. I'm sort of tired of the talk which says, well, let's look at these individual successes. If you look at it en masse, the overwhelming majority of students don't get an acceptable education, which means they can't get a competitive job, which means we've sort of reinforced the cycle of poverty, and we are not giving people a means of sort of transcending their situations. And I am a former public school teacher. I do get it. I care deeply about it. I send my children to private school, and I tell you, anyone who has any ability to do so does in the city of Harrisburg, and you would have to, I think, as a parent, because the schools aren't good enough. So the question is, how do we elevate them to the point where I would feel comfortable sending my children there, other people will feel comfortable doing it, and that is a slow process that is going to take time. It requires leadership, which is sort of transparent and open. The Commonwealth currently, the district is in recovery status, so the Commonwealth has oversight, but it doesn't have any real power. So you may have seen in the news, the recovery officer can say things like, you really ought to hire a qualified business manager. You can't just have somebody making the budgets who isn't qualified. And the school district can say, thank you for that opinion, but we're going to keep our guy. The Commonwealth might say, you need to advertise for this position, or you need to open your books for the auditors, but they really don't have the power to get in there and do it. And this is a problem in Pennsylvania, and this is where we get to a very hot button debate over charter schools, which is something I've been very strongly supportive of, which is not the usual position for a Democratic mayor or sort of Democrats generally. And I do get the fact that the charter school law in Pennsylvania isn't a great solution, because it essentially, if it isn't coupled with improvement of the school district, it can lead to simply a siphoning off of resources. But nonetheless, I come down very strongly on, you've got to give parents options that are acceptable for the education. There's nothing more important than doing that. And we've had some great, in my opinion, charter school applications over the past several years, including one for Bishop McDevitt that was rejected a few years ago. That was an arts-based K-5 charter school that could have been really, really interesting. We have a new one that is proposed for the Midtown Hack campus, which is going through the appeals process right now, which is also very interesting, very strong. If you could give parents options for young children, which is what those charter schools are proposing, that they feel comfortable with as an alternative to private school. We do have good private options. St. Stephen's does a great job in the city. There's Catholic school. There's Harrisburg Academy. There's lots of good educational opportunities in Harrisburg and the region. But a public charter school would need to be, I think, in that mix in the short term. And then in the long term, you've got to work to talk about how we can fix the problem. And that is a longer conversation. I don't think schools should be funded through property taxes. I do agree with the overall concept of changing how we fund schools. There isn't a fair funding formula for schools, which means basically if you're in a wealthier community, you've got a lot of resources for your school district. If you're the poorer one, you don't, and that's all sort of tied in how we fund our schools. We've got to have a serious conversation about this in Pennsylvania, and I'm not saying Harrisburg is that different from other urban centers, but the ultimate answer is we can make a lot of progress, but we can only go so far as a city if we don't bring the school district along with us. And so that is the next sort of frontier, and it's one that I'm not afraid to tackle, and I do believe the district should be in receivership. until we can sort of have the type of transparency and leadership that we need.
And we have time for one more question.
Oh, too long, I think.
Does anybody have, oh, got some in the back?
Maybe we can do a rapid fire. Okay.
Mayor, just one question. I know I was the one that asked the question about Old Shaky.
Yeah.
So I guess before I get to that, the one question I did have, I'm a big proponent of the bike lane.
Yeah.
Has there ever been discussion of bringing in scooters? Like if you go to Nashville, you go to
Sure.
Lyme, that you can leave the scooter
Was
there.
it? 2 questions for
Yeah.
scooters.
So you can leave the scooter there,
All right.
you take your app, you can pick up the scooter, and I can go from 2nd Street to the Millworks up to, Cafe 1500. So that was one question. And the second part of that question is, again, I would love to see Old Shaky connect the 2 rivers again. I think we have something in Harrisburg that separates us and differentiates us from really any city in Pennsylvania, that is City Island. I have a dream to see City Island flourish and have restaurants and a boardwalk so it doesn't flood and brings really both East Shore and West Shore together. So if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, it is. City Island is a great example of a part of the city that brings people together from all over the centers. Sort of embody that and do a wonderful job of bringing people to Harrisburg, and we need that. I'm all for. Honestly, the reason that the Walnut Street pedestrian bridge wasn't put back after it collapsed was because the West Shore was uneasy about having it. And one of the reasons that we haven't renovated the Cap Bridge is how is it going to connect to New Cumberland and Lemoyne and Wormleysburg, and there has not been a great deal of support from the Cumberland County side. So that's something we continue to work on. From our perspective, it seems like a wonderful thing. Sometimes from their perspective, they like viewing Harrisburg from the distance, but they don't necessarily want people coming over. But let's talk scooters, because I know a lot about scooters. So, have you all been to like DC? Do you know what we're talking about here with these scooters? If you go to DC, if I just use that as an example, you cannot walk down a street without there being like 16 of these portable scooters. And what happens is these companies, they go into cities, they basically drop scooters off, and then they hire local people to take them home at night. They collect them and they plug them in at home, recharge the batteries, and then they drop them off again the next day. And then they're scattered about, and it works very nicely. So I was down for the Cherry Blossom Festival in DC, and so you could scooter all around the memorials, and it was lovely. Pennsylvania does not currently allow the scooters, so it's not that Harrisburg can somehow, flaunt Pennsylvania law and say, just like we don't have a parking protected bike lane, you've got to move through legislation. So scooter folks have been to Harrisburg, they stopped in at City Hall, they've been on the Hill, and there is a general belief that the legislature is going to approve it this year, and if you want it, you should lobby the legislature for it, because as soon as they do, Harrisburg will be one of the first cities to do it, because I support it. And I think there's even one of the bill options has Harrisburg as one of the pilot cities for the scooters. I think it'll definitely happen. It's a great way to get life. There are other sort of interesting things about these scooters. If you don't want them in certain quadrants, you can the technology is such that you can geo-fence them. So you could for instance control the speed limit in Riverfront Park by saying in Riverfront Park they can only go 5 miles an hour, they can't go 15 miles an hour or something like that. The technology allows you to do that based on geofencing, and they do work very well if you have a network of bike lanes, if you have good sidewalks. We don't want to do it in a way which is irresponsible and has people, creates more collisions and hazards. But they work very well in parks. So you can set the standards. You can also, I would recommend working with. We'll probably do an RFP and work with one company rather than 6 in an effort to sort of roll it out and have a little more control. And you can do more than places like DC does in terms of having certain designated drop-off areas. You don't really just have to have them scattered about the sidewalk. But I love them. I think it's great. And so maybe scooters will be coming to Harrisburg soon. Good. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.